Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? It is time to dive deep in to our wide receiver video here for week 16 of the NFL season. Before we jump in to all that great content, though, I've got two announcements that you all need to be paying attention to. Number one is a giveaway, and it is a sweet giveaway. We got ourselves an autographed Jalen Waddle jersey that we're going to be giving away this week. For you to have a chance to win, though, you've got to be signed up over at Pristine Auction. Head over there, create a free account. When you do that using code word headliners, you're going to get a $10 off coupon. So whenever you make your first purchase on Pristine Auction, you're going to get $10 off of that, and you're going to be in the drawing, have a chance to win this Jalen Waddle jersey. For us to make sure that we can catch you, though, leave a comment down below, and then we'll pick somebody from the comments. And if you have your account set up at Pristine Auction, you're going to be taking home a Jalen Waddle jersey if we pick you. So do that. Number two, the weather this week will suck. And it is really hard for us to know in this moment exactly how bad it's going to be. As we know, weather is always changing. I myself live in the Midwest. I know that I am a part of this gigantic snowstorm that is apparently going to rip through here. Not just a snowstorm, but blizzard-like conditions, meaning whiteout, horrible wind, things of that nature. And based on what I've been told by my local weather reports, it could last all the way through Sunday, meaning the Saturday games are going to get hit with it if they are here in the Midwest. So, with everything in this video, make sure two things you take into account: the possible weather changes that could happen, and you stay tuned the rest of the week to the ranking shows and our update shows and the live show on Friday night to discuss whether or not this weather is going to be as bad as they say, whether it's going to miss some people, whether one area might be worse than another, whatever it may be. There's going to be a lot of updates this week, so make sure you all stay tuned. With all that being said, though, let's hop right into it. We're going to talk about Thursday night football, and that's going to be the Jacksonville Jags and the New York Jets. Hopefully in New York, this weather will not be to them by the time, now it might be cold and, nasty, but this nasty weather that we're thinking that is coming through here will not be in New York. So hopefully Thursday night, we have no issues. The New York Jets allow the second fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Amon-Ra had a subpar day last week against them, had 70-ish receiving yards, and then really outside of that, none of the other wide receivers really did anything. So it was a huge touchdown to the tight end that ended up sealing the deal for the Lions. Could expect some of the same things this week. Zay Jones and Christian Kirk are going to be listed as starts, but for me, I'm hoping and praying that we're looking at about 70 to 80 receiving yards for either of them. Maybe one of them finds the end zone, and really at that point, we're looking 8 to 10 fantasy points. So I'm not expecting huge outputs from either of these guys. As far as the New York Jets go, Garrett Wilson is really the only guy I'm considering. Corey Davis, full participant in practice this week so far, so he should be on the field. Garrett Wilson, I mean, him and Zach Wilson, they linked up this past week. Garrett Wilson almost had, close to 100 receiving yards against Detroit, and now he's going to be getting a Jacksonville team that is an okay matchup as well, and there could be an opportunity for some big plays there too. Now, it really depends on if they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more than what they did last week, kind of what the game plan. Do they try to run it a little bit more? Now, Detroit's run defense, it was pretty good. Detroit's run defense has been very good, actually, over the last several weeks, so they weren't going to be able to run the football that well, and when they tried, they didn't pick up anything, and that's the reason why they were throwing it so much. Do they do the same thing against Jacksonville? If they do, Garrett Wilson, for me, again, going to be kind of in that top 25 wide receiver area that we kind of had him at last week. Atlanta and Baltimore, and Desmond Ridder, I mean, he didn't look awful last week. They didn't really let him go either. I mean, it was Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson, both of those guys, I mean, together combined for over 20 touches on the ground. They're going to run the football an awful lot. And when you look at the people that made that happen last week, it was Drake London for the most part, because he had like 90% of their receiving yards. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. When they do throw it, Drake London's probably going to be the beneficiary of it, and he's going to be the guy getting those targets. Like, Ritter's not going to go throwing 30 to 35 times a game, though. I mean, right in between probably 20 to 25 passing attempts, if that, is really where they're going to want to keep Desmond Ridder of the rest of the season. So for me, when taking a look at Drake London, right now it's like 7 to 9 fantasy points. If he can get in that 70, 80 receiving yards range, then, you know, if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's going to be right around probably 10 points, depending on how many receptions he had. When you take a look at Baltimore is a mess, all right? Because Atlanta allows the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. This should be a smash matchup. And Demarcus Robinson is a guy that maybe you would want to start, but the offense hasn't done anything with Tyler Huntley. They're really just focused on trying to run the ball as much as possible. And oh, by the way, we lost the Dew for the rest of the season, and they signed Sammy Watkins. And I don't know if Sammy Watkins is even going to be available this week. So for me, instead of trying to get cute with it, I would like to start Demarcus Robinson. If you're like in a 16-team league, a very, very deep league, maybe he's an option as a wide receiver 3. But for me, I'm going to look elsewhere for more upside. Detroit and Carolina. And Carolina's defense at times this season has looked really, really good. And at other times this season, they've looked very beatable. So what defense is Detroit going to find on the road this week? I mean, here's the thing about that defense. At one point, they're kind of shut down, getting turnovers. And then at another point, you take a look at them and they're not, they're allowing quite a bit of yards. So for me, when taking a look at the matchup, I know the Lions offense has been up and down on the road, and I'm not really holding last week against them because the New York Jets defense is an elite defense. They're a very, very good defense, and they've shut down a lot of really good teams this year. So Detroit's, issues on the road doesn't translate to that game for me. What does, though, will be this game. Because this is the type of defense that Detroit's offense should beat, okay? So Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's going to be a start for me. Always is, always will be inside the top 10 more than likely. DJ Chark will go back to being a start for me because I do think that we see him get back to some of that big playability that we saw a couple of weeks ago and even a few weeks ago against Jacksonville as well. He is a guy that I do like to kind of amass 60, 70, 80 receiving yards, have a couple of big plays with it. He's really kind of the number 2 in the offense right now in terms of targets, and they're spreading it around. Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, Jameson Williams, all of them are getting some type of targets, but DJ Chark is kind of that X factor right now in this lineup because he does so many different things in the flat, over the middle, deep on the sidelines, a lot of different things to kind of help spread the ball around here. Now, DJ Moore for Carolina will be a start. I mean, this is a great matchup for him. Detroit's still allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers. Bend don't break. They're not allowing a whole lot of touchdowns, but they're allowing a whole lot of yards. Going to give DJ Moore the start. If you're in one of those deeper leagues and you're looking for like a dart throw that you just hope for, Terrace Marshall Jr. would end up being that number 2 for me, a guy that he could end up scoring a long touchdown, but DJ Moore I think will be very safe. I think he gets close to 100 receiving yards this week. Buffalo and Chicago, and here we go, one of those weather games that we're going to have to keep an eye on, and because of that, Buffalo, for what feels like the 10th straight week, we're talking about something to do with the weather with them. So as of right now, Diggs and Davis are both going to be starts for me in this matchup, and I think that's fine. Chicago doesn't have any starts, so we don't even need to talk about them. It doesn't matter for them. Diggs and Davis are going to be the biggest thoughts here, okay? Dawson Knox, I already talked about being a sit for me. However, I did mention that if there's a lot of weather in that matchup, which there looks like there might be now, Dawson Knox would end up being a start. It's going to be the same thing here. Diggs is going to be a start no matter what. If the weather's bad, we're going to have to temper expectations and bring down that ceiling. Gabe Davis, if the weather's bad, will end up going to a sit. Dawson Knox will then become a start for me. So we're going to have to keep an eye on what will be coming through the Chicago area on Saturday when this game is played. We got to keep an eye on it. We're going to have to talk about it even more. We'll look at that later on in the week. As of right now, Davis is a very risky high upside play for me. And then Diggs, he's going to get more than enough targets. And we've seen in these bad weather matchups, he still plays just fine. Diggs will be okay for me. And for Chicago, like I mentioned, we're not even interested in that. New Orleans and Cleveland also may be caught up in the weather this week. And not only that, but Chris Olave was added to the injury report this week with a hamstring issue. That is never good to be added to the injury report midweek with a hamstring problem, especially if you're going to be going on the road to a cold weather game in Cleveland. I don't even know if Chris Olave ends up playing this week. So that will be something to keep an eye on. For me right now, Chris Olave will still be a start. We'll see what happens in the week. Maybe he just tweaked his hammy a little bit, ended up sitting out the rest of practice, and maybe we see him get back out there. Regardless of the weather, even if the weather is bad, Chris Olave would still be a start for me, even though he'd be a high risk start. If for some reason Chris Olave does not play this week and the weather ends up being fine for the Cleveland game, then I absolutely, in deeper leagues, in leagues where I'm kind of looking for that piece this week to help me get over the top, that is when Rashid Shaheed will end up coming back into play with his speed. He's a little too big play dependent for me to just throw out there willy-nilly as a start. He's a guy that might hit some weeks and might not hit in some others. But with Olave, if he is out, I think Shaheed at that point does become a guy that we could potentially play. And then for Cleveland, Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones, even in some of the bad weather games, the cold, the wind, we've seen these guys still get a decent amount of looks. Deshaun Watson going to Amari Cooper right now is something where it's like, yeah, we can bet on 5 or 6 targets and a very low ceiling. It has a decent floor because he's going to probably get you 5 to 6 fantasy points, but really isn't going above and beyond that right now. We're seeing a lot of the bigger plays and touchdown potential go to David Njoku and Donovan Peoples-Jones. So depending on how bad the weather is where I end up ranking these guys, but I probably end up leaving them both as starts unless the weather is like so bad that they're not even going to be able to see out there. But for right now, they're both going to be starts. Where they're ranked at is really will depend on how bad the weather ends up being. Seattle and Kansas City, Tyler Lockett likely to miss this week. The hope is it is only 1 week though. So if you're a Tyler Lockett owner, hopefully you'll get him back in week 17 for your championship push. But for week 16 here, no Tyler Lockett means Marquise Goodwin is going to be a start going up against Kansas City that allows the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. This is definitely a matchup where we could see Marquise Goodwin score, and we've seen it already this season. When DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett have been banged up previously, we've seen Marquise Goodwin taking a bit of a role with this lineup. In really good matchups, we've seen him have some good plays and score some touchdowns. So because Lockett ends up being out, Goodwin is still going to be a start. His score doesn't reach 15. I get that, but I'm still going to list him as a start here because this matchup is just going to be too good, and Geno's going to be throwing the football in this matchup. Juju is going to be only my only start here. Seattle allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. That right there indicates a little bit of a tougher matchup. Again, still an offense that is going to spread the ball around an awful lot. If you're not Travis Kelce, you're not locked into targets every single week. But the good news is that there's so many weapons right now on offense with guys just all over the place that it allows Juju to get a lot of one-on-one matchups, and they can put him in some situations where he's got the upside, he's got the potential. So for me, for Juju, even though that upside really isn't there because of how many players they spread the ball to, I think he's a very safe play. The good news for the Giants in Minnesota is they're indoors. They don't have to worry about the weather, so that's always good to have. Minnesota allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Darius Slayton, I think, is the big play guy, the big play potential in this offense this week. I also don't expect the Giants to go up by 33 points and basically cash it in like they're going to win the game, Indianapolis Colts. So because of that, I do think they're going to be throwing the football all game and not just giving Zach Moss more touches than he should ever have in his entire life. So with that being said, Slayton is a nice play with high upside, high volume going his way. And then Isaiah Hodgins is more of like kind of an emergency, touchdown option for me. I don't really want to start him because he's very touchdown dependent. If he doesn't get his touchdown, he's not fantasy viable. Whereas because Darius Slayton is the big play guy in this offense, he has a couple of big plays that might really make his fantasy week at that point, and we don't have to worry about the touchdown. So because of that, Hodgins is a lot more risky for me because I think he's got to find the end zone to return that value. Justin Jefferson, absolutely going to be a start. And yes, Thielen scored last week, but you also have to look at the game scenario. They were down 33 points with 8 minutes left in the 3rd quarter. Of course, they were going to have to throw the ball a lot, basically every play. That's why KJ Osborne and Adam Thielen both ended up getting as many points as they did last week. Now, KJ Osborne isn't listed here because I'm not even considering him because, again, it took a 33-point deficit for him to be be fantasy viable. He's only been fantasy viable a couple of times this year. It's not something that happens consistently. For Adam Thielen, it kind of goes back to that touchdown, though. Does he get a touchdown against the New York Giants? For me, it is possible, but it's risky because I think his whole day is going to be predicated on getting on the end zone. Cincinnati and New England, and I'm still concerned about T. Higgins' hamstring. I mean, yes, he ended up scoring a touchdown last week, but he played in just over 50% of the snaps. He wasn't even out there as much as we normally see. I am worried that he's still banged up. I am worried that he's still going to be limited in what is a tougher matchup because New England's defense is pretty good. Now, Joe Burrow looking like an MVP candidate, playing very well right now. This offense playing very well. We know Jamar Chase is going to be a start. If you're running out T. Higgins, you just have to keep your fingers crossed that he finds the end zone because if his snap share is anything like we saw last week, he's not going to be on the field enough to really establish himself with just the volume. We've got to find the end zone with him. For the New England Patriots, like Devontae Parker is still in the concussion protocol. Jacoby Myers has been banged up as of recently, and then he had that huge gaffe last week. I don't know if they're going to hold that against him or not. Just there's not anything here with this being a little bit of a tougher matchup against Cincinnati for me to get super excited about and say, hey, this is it right here. Let's start this guy. I'm out on the wide receivers in New England. Houston and Tennessee allows the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. That's the good news. The bad news is that all the pass catching options in Houston are banged up right now. Chris Moore was added to the injury report. Brandon Cooks was a limited participant in practice so far this week. Nico Collins hasn't practiced at all this week. I don't even know who's going to be catching passes this week. At this point, we will go to Jordan Akins at the tight end position because there won't be any wide receivers that will be available. So we're just going to have to keep an eye on these guys the rest of the week. On the flip side for Tennessee, Houston allowing the fourth fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. And not only that, Ryan Tannehill is looking doubtful to play this week. He's banged up right now. He may not be able to get out there. Treylon Burks, it does look like he is practicing right now and is hoping to be back this week and out of the protocol. But even if he is, I don't even know if I can start him in this matchup because of the quarterback situation. Washington and San Francisco, and I don't really trust any Washington wide receiver this week. Now, the one reason I'm going to start Terry McLaurin is because he's Taylor Heinicke's guy. I mean, he's always looking to Terry McLaurin, and those two are connected at the hip. However, this is going to be a tough matchup. Is Heinicke even going to have time to throw the football against San Francisco? Tough matchup. I'm not loving it here. Terry McLaurin is like a low-end wide receiver 2-ish option for me in this tough matchup this week. Brandon Ayuk will be a start for me. Ayuk and Kittle getting lots of targets. No Deebo Samuel. Maybe CMC. They start to hold him back a little bit now, knowing that the West is wrapped up. Probably not going to get the number 1 seed at this point. They're probably going to be a little bit cautious with CMC to keep him healthy. I think that's just going to lead to more targets for Ayuk, which will just help his upside. Philadelphia and Dallas is going to be my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Make sure you head over to manscaped.com. Use code word headliners at checkout. Get 20% off your entire order and free shipping at manscaped.com. Philadelphia and Dallas was going to be my must-watch matchup before the Jalen Hurts injury information came out. And because of that, I'm like, I'm still going to leave it. But for as good as the Dallas defense has been this year, they still allow the 7th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Teams have to throw it against Dallas because they're battling back and forth with that Dallas offense that's been good this season. Jalen Hurts being out seems like a very, very bad thing for this offense. And rightfully so, because Jalen Hurts has been awesome. And Jalen Hurts being out will affect this offense. But if we're looking at just purely fantasy output, Gardner Minshew should still be able to get the ball to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. We've seen it before. I mean, Gardner Minshew has been a fantasy viable quarterback before. He's helped fantasy viable wide receivers before. I mean, we've seen it in Jacksonville. The guy can play. He knows how to play. This isn't just a third string quarterback that doesn't have, he's got starting experience in the NFL. Now, is the ceiling as high? Absolutely not. Because that run game portion of the offense that you're now going to be missing without Jalen Hurts, that is going to be gone, and that's going to hurt some of the upside. right? Because that draws in linebackers, that draws in safeties, it gives one-on-one coverage down the field. So the ceiling we've seen from A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith will not be there. A.J. Brown will absolutely still be a start for me, though, and Devontae Smith is kind of a big play dependent start. But I'm still going to go with both of these guys because it's going to be an offensive battle, and they're going to have to throw the football. I am definitely looking at A.J. Brown and Smith as starts this week. CeeDee Lamb will continue to be a start for me. He's starting to see a little bit of a drop in the volume. Philadelphia does allow the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, so I'm only going to be banking on the one guy that I know can truly win one-on-one matchups. That's going to be CeeDee Lamb, and again, he might be a little bit lower this week, but he is still a guy that I'll put in my lineup. Las Vegas coming off an exciting win last week against New England. Now they will get Pittsburgh this week, and Pittsburgh is allowing the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So we know Pittsburgh has an issue stopping the pass. So Davante Adams, even after a down week last week, we're going to go back to him this week. Should be a big week for him. Matt Collins is going to end up being a start, and I don't love it, but the numbers, given the matchup, suggest that he is the guy that you should play. But look at the X factor. It's a 2 for me. Look at the overall score. It's only a 16. He is a high-risk, touchdown-dependent play with Darren Waller being back, all right? So he's not a guy that I absolutely love in this matchup, but he is a guy that I think could score, and that's why he's still listed as a start. On the flip side, for the Pittsburgh, I mean, there's nobody in Pittsburgh that we're really looking at right now at the wide receiver position outside Diontae Johnson. He has slowly, over the last several weeks, started to produce a little bit more with all the volume that he's gotten. Now, this is the only time since we've started this that I have seen somebody with a volume of 5, meaning they are in the top 10 or top 12 of most targets per game at the position. All right. So Diontae Johnson, top 12 most targets at the wide receiver position per game. He's got a 1, which means he's like in the 50s for production on a per game basis. So there's just hasn't been a whole lot of production. But over the last few weeks, we're seeing 60, 70, 90 receiving yards. Probably the same thing against Las Vegas this week. Will Kenny Pickett be back? Now, if Kenny Pickett's back, then Pickens will end up probably becoming a start for me as well. George Pickens will be a start, and Diontae Johnson will be a start. If it's just Mitchell Trubisky again this week, though, then it will just be Diontae Johnson. Green Bay and Miami, Allen Lazard, Christian Watson. Who's going to get it? Who isn't going to get it? I mean, what running back? A.J. Dillon clear concussion protocol. It just feels like Green Bay is a mess right now, and I don't love it. Christian Watson will be a start going up against Miami. It's an okay matchup. It's not a great matchup. Christian Watson, a lot of touchdown upside, coming off a down performance. Can he get back in stride? That's where I look at things and say, okay, we'll see what happens with him. So Christian Watkins, he's got the upside for me. He will remain a start. Allen Lazard is the issue here because they're going to have to throw the football. They're going to have to throw it. So for me, I'm going to leave Allen Lazard as a start. I'm going to hope he finds the end zone. He's a high-risk play for me, and really kind of Christian Watson is kind of a high-risk play for me as well, because look at his production. He's got a 4 in production, but a 0 in volume. It's because he scored so many touchdowns but sees so few targets that's really propped up his fantasy value. So I'll put him as a start, but both of these guys to me are risky right now this time of the year. Hill and Waddle, though, even though Green Bay allows the 5th fewest points, I could care less. Lock in Waddle, lock in Hill. If anything, they're both safe starts because they should see more than enough volume. Tua, hopefully, back at home this week, can get back into the grind a little bit. Had a good game against Buffalo. Was able to weather... See what I did there? Was able to weather the weather and make it through that game. So for me, both of them will be locked into my lineup. Denver and the LA Rams, and I heard that Nickelodeon is going to have them in their Nick game where they do like SpongeBob and slime and all that stuff like that. I mean, what better way than to introduce kids to the game of football by letting them watch the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Rams, right? What a great experience. Those kids are all going to play baseball. Sutton is expected back in week 16. For me with Sutton, he's going to be remaining a sit until I see for sure that he is back. If he does come back, then Jerry Jeudy, I don't know if I can start Jerry Jeudy if Courtland Sutton is back. We're on our second string quarterback. We're in a position where if Sutton is back, he's going to be taking some targets. targets? How many targets does Jeudy actually get? Does the Rams defense hold up against them? There's so many question marks. It's a very risky start this week for Jerry Jeudy. On the flip side, for the Los Angeles Rams, Denver allows the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. We're missing Ben Skowronek now. He's going to be out for the remainder of the season. It's just one of those things where, you know what? Why even try to risk it this week? Tampa Bay and Arizona, there's a couple of different things in play here. It's a tale of two cities. Evans and Chris Godwin. Yes, people don't love what they're seeing from Tampa Bay right now. And we saw last week Mike Evans look a lot better. All right, not a great week, but still a decent week. The connection is there with him. His fantasy point output would be a lot higher if it weren't for several plays over the last several weeks that had been called back. And now we're getting an Arizona team that can be a little bit tough. So Mike Evans will continue to be risky for me. Definitely the amount of volume that he gets, the amount of targets he gets, warrants a start every single week. It's just, what does he actually put together with those targets? Chris Godwin, though, is the much safer bet in this offense right now. He's getting the targets and he's producing for the most part, which is something I see continuing this week. But now we flip it over to the Arizona side, where we're on our third string quarterback, and we've got a couple of guys who have been fantasy viable the entire season. If you own Marquise Brown, I'm going to tell you straight up right now, he might be listed as a start here based on the gaudy numbers he had at the beginning of the season, but for me, he's a sit. I don't want to play Marquise Brown if I own him. In fact, I'm looking for higher upside options. In fact, I might be looking for even safer options as well. I just don't see a decent fantasy game from him on a third string quarterback. DeAndre Hopkins will be like a wide receiver 2 option for me this week. He is a guy that has a little bit of a better skill set to win with that type of a backup quarterback. And really, he's been playing with backup quarterbacks his entire career and has done fine. So for me, for DeAndre Hopkins, he's still the alpha in this offense. He's still the guy that's going to get the most targets, and he's still the guy that we have to start. The Chargers and the Colts are last matchup of the week. We're going to go with Keenan Allen. We're going to go with Mike Williams. Indianapolis is allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. However, just a few weeks ago, they were allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, and now they're all the way to 7th. A lot of it based on that game last week from Minnesota. Now, is that just going to happen again? Probably not, because Indianapolis probably won't take a huge lead if I had to guess. But the Chargers are still going to throw the football. The Keenan Allen's going to get his volume. Mike Williams is going to get his big plays against this defense, and they're both going to be fantasy viable. And on the flip side, with the Chargers allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, for me, Pittman right now is going to be a guy that is like a fringe, kind of like low-end wide receiver too. The targets will be there. The big plays will not. We're seeing a lot of stuff over the middle and underneath. They're doing some running things with him right now. They're just trying to get the ball in his hands, but there has been basically no upside with him because there's been no big plays. Probably the same thing in this matchup as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for my wide receiver analysis this week. Hit the like button before you get out of here. Make sure you leave a comment, so when we pick the winner for that Jalen Waddle jersey, you're going to have a shot at it. And you have to make sure that you set up that Pristine Auction account. Subscribe if you're new here to the channel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you all in the rankings episodes and the live show on Friday this week. Peace out, stay safe, and stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.